Asterigos Curse of the Stars. This one kind of came out of nowhere for me, and man, it's one of those games where you start playing and you're like, wait, why is no one talking about this? It's sitting there quietly just waiting to impress the heck out of you. So, Asterigos is this action RPG that draws heavy inspiration from Greek and Roman mythology. Right away, the world sucks you in, bright, colorful environments mixed with these dark, mysterious undertones. It's like God of War, the early ones meets Immortals Phoenix Rising, but with its own flair. You play as Hilda, a young warrior on a mission to uncover the truth about her father's disappearance. Yeah, it sounds kind of cliche, but trust me, the way it's executed feels fresh. The gameplay, this is where it shines. It's got that tight, responsive combat where every weapon feels unique. You've got swords, spears, hammers each with different movesets. What I loved most though is how you're encouraged to experiment. It's not just hack and slash, there's a real rhythm to it. You mess up, that's on you. But when you nail a combo and take down a tough boss, so satisfying. Now, speaking of bosses, these guys are epic. They're straight up mythical nightmares. Each one feels distinct, both visually and mechanically. You'll get hit with that old school, okay, let's learn their patterns vibe, which is something I think a lot of modern games miss. And let me tell you about the world building. It's chef's kiss. The city of Aphes? Gorgeous. It's filled with little nooks and crannies to explore, and it's brimming with lore. I mean, if you're into reading journal entries, deciphering ancient scripts, or piecing together the history of a cursed civilization, this game's got you covered. It does this thing where it balances mystery and clarity, like you'll get enough breadcrumbs to keep going, but there's always more to discover if you dig deeper. The real kicker though is the tone. It's serious enough to hook you, but it's also got these lighter, more whimsical moments that balance it out. Hilda herself is a great protagonist, plucky, determined, but not annoying. The way she interacts with other characters feels natural too, with dialogue choices that actually matter.
I didn't want to hurt them, especially when they can't really hurt me.
I'll be honest, Asterigos isn't some massive AAA production, but that's kind of its charm. It's polished where it counts the gameplay, the visuals, the music, it all comes together to create an experience that's honestly better than a lot of overhyped blockbusters. If you're into action RPGs with great combat, rich lore, and a world that begs to be explored, you can't miss this one. Seriously, this is one of those games where you'll finish it and immediately want to talk someone's ear off about how good it was. Returnal. Now, I know this one's been on some people's radar, but I'm still calling it underrated because it didn't get the love it deserved when it dropped. And seriously, this game is a masterpiece. If you skipped it because of the whole roguelike thing or the fact that it's tough as nails, I'm here to tell you you're missing out. So, Returnal throws you into this mind-bending sci-fi world as Celine, a space explorer who crash lands on this hostile alien planet called Atropos. Right away, the vibe hits you. It's eerie, it's mysterious, and it's absolutely dripping with atmosphere. You're walking through these hauntingly beautiful environments and the game just refuses to hold your hand. It's like, good luck, you're gonna need it. And let's talk gameplay because, oh man, Returnal nails it. This is some of the smoothest, most satisfying third-person shooting I've ever experienced. The controls are razor sharp and the movement, it's butter. You're constantly dashing, dodging, and weaving through these insane bullet hell patterns. The enemies are relentless and every fight feels like a dance where you're always on the edge of your seat. The roguelike elements? Yeah, they're here, but they're implemented in such a clever way that it doesn't feel punishing, it feels motivating. Every time you die, and trust me, you'll die a lot, you wake up back at the crash site. But here's the thing, the world changes. The layout shifts, the enemies are different, and you're constantly unlocking new gear, weapons, and abilities that make each run feel fresh. The story is where it gets really interesting. It's one of those show, don't tell narratives where you're piecing things together as you go. You'll stumble upon audio logs, cryptic messages, and these weirdly personal moments like finding a version of Celine's house just sitting there on this alien planet. It's like PT meets Alien and it's as unsettling as it sounds. And the way the game blends story and gameplay is genius. Every death isn't just a mechanic, it's tied to the narrative. Celine is trapped in this time loop and every loop reveals a little more about her past, her psyche, and the planet itself. It's existential, it's trippy, and it's so satisfying to unravel. And visually, holy hell, Returnal is gorgeous. The particle effects alone are a spectacle. You've got neon bullets flying everywhere, crazy alien flora lighting up the environment, and these sprawling biomes that range from dark, creepy ruins to lush jungles. Pair that with the sound design, which is absolutely top tier. Like, play this with headphones and you'll feel every creepy whisper and alien growl. Look, I get it. Roguelikes aren't for everyone and Returnal can be tough, but if you stick with it, this game rewards you in ways that few others do. It's got that addictive one more run vibe, but it's also packed with depth, heart, and a story that'll keep you thinking long after the credits roll. So yeah, Returnal, absolutely a 10 out of 10 in my book. If you've been sleeping on this one, now's the time to wake up, add it to your list because this is one game you can't afford to miss. Murdered Soul Suspect.
Progressing deeper into his journey, Ronin...
Alright, so Murdered Soul Suspect is one of those games that doesn't get talked about enough, and I don't get why. It's such a cool concept you play as Ronin O'Connor, a detective who's been murdered and now has to solve his own case as a ghost. If that doesn't sound interesting, I don't know what does. The game's vibe is what got me hooked right away. It's set in Salem, Massachusetts, and the whole town just feels haunted, like spooky and mysterious in the best way. The visuals are a little dated now, sure, but they still do a good job of making you feel like you're stuck in this eerie supernatural world. Gameplay-wise, it's not super complex, but it works. You're solving mysteries by finding clues, connecting the dots, and sometimes sneaking past these creepy shadow demons. There's no crazy combat or anything, it's more about exploring and figuring stuff out. The ghost powers are fun though. You can possess people to read their minds or influence them, and you can even walk through certain walls to find hidden stuff. Now, I'm not gonna lie, there are a few rough edges. The stealth sections with the demons can get a bit repetitive and the pacing slows down sometimes, but honestly, the story makes up for it. It's emotional and full of twists. Ronin's backstory is interesting, and the whole mystery about his death ties into Salem's history in a way that's pretty cool. If you're looking for something different, something that's more about story and atmosphere than action, I'd say give Murdered Soul Suspect a shot. It's not perfect, but it's unique and it sticks with you. Definitely worth checking out if you're in the mood for a chill detective game with a supernatural twist. Hitman Absolution. So, I just played Hitman Absolution recently, and let me tell you, it's an absolute blast if you go in with the right mindset. Yeah, I know some fans of the series hate on this one because it veered away from the traditional sandbox style the franchise is known for, but honestly, as a more linear, story-driven take on Hitman, it's a total win. The game feels like a slick, cinematic action stealth experience. You've got tightly crafted levels that guide you through 47's journey, with plenty of options to take down your targets if you're willing to experiment. Sure, it's not as open as something like Hitman 2 or Hitman 3, but the smaller, more contained environments let you focus on mastering the tools you're given. Visually, it still holds up surprisingly well. The dark, moody atmosphere and sharp character models set the tone perfectly. The story leans into a more personal angle for Agent 47, which some people might find divisive, but I appreciated it. It adds a bit of depth to the otherwise cold, calculating assassin.
Diana did this for you. Why?
The gameplay is where it truly shines though. Absolution strikes this sweet balance between stealth and action. If you're patient, you can sneak through entire sections like a ghost, but the game also gives you room to get creative with disguises and environmental kills. And when things go loud, it's still satisfying to fight your way out with some solid third-person gunplay. If you approach it expecting a classic Hitman sandbox, sure, you might be let down, but if you're in the mood for a more focused, narrative-driven experience that still delivers on the series' signature stealth action vibe, Hitman Absolution is absolutely worth your time. Don't let the hate fool you, this one's a gem if you play it for what it is. Batman Telltale series. Batman the Telltale series is honestly one of the most unique takes on the Dark Knight we've seen in gaming. Instead of focusing on action and gadgets like most Batman games, this one is all about choices, relationships, and a deeper dive into Bruce Wayne's psyche. The thing that makes this game stand out is how much it leans into the tension of being both Bruce Wayne and Batman. You're constantly making decisions that shape how people see you, whether you're dealing with allies like Alfred or potential enemies like Harvey Dent. And these choices, they matter, they change how the story plays out, and it keeps you guessing about who you can trust. The writing is sharp too. It does a great job of showing a more human side of Bruce. You're not just the billionaire playboy or the caped crusader, you're a guy trying to juggle this insane double life while dealing with the consequences of your actions. It's a cool twist to focus so much on Bruce instead of just Batman.
Why? My parents could have given him anything. Why would he just shoot them?
And don't worry, there's still plenty of action. The quick time events during fights are actually pretty fun and keep things cinematic, but the real highlight is the detective stuff. Piecing together clues at crime scenes is super satisfying and adds a nice break from all the drama. The art style might take a little getting used to. It's got that signature Telltale look, kind of comic bookish, but it fits the world well. The voice acting is top-notch, with Troy Baker absolutely nailing it as Bruce Wayne. If you're a fan of Batman, this game is a must-play. It's not about being a badass in combat, it's about the choices in the story. story, and it really delivers. Plus, seeing a new spin on classic characters like the Joker, Catwoman, and Penguin keeps things fresh. It's a shorter experience, but it's one that sticks with you. Definitely check it out if you're into story-driven games or just want to see a different side of the bat. As Dusk Falls. Now guys, I know probably super niche title cause it's more like a visual novel. When I first played it there was little hesitation, but listen to me, if you just enjoy interesting stories and games, this one is worth trying out. So As Dusk Falls is one of those games that proves you don't need crazy graphics or intense gameplay to tell a gripping story. This is a narrative driven experience through and through, and it absolutely nails it. It's like playing through an interactive crime drama, and honestly, it's hard to put down once you start. The story revolves around two families whose lives collide after a botched robbery in a small desert town. What makes it so good is how human and relatable the characters feel. They're messy, flawed, and real, and the choices you make can completely change the course of the story. This isn't a game where you can predict what's going to happen next, things spiral fast, and your decisions have serious weight. The art style is pretty unique. It's almost like a graphic novel come to life with still frame animations that might feel a little strange at first, but totally work in the context of the game. It's all about focusing on the story and the emotions, and that style helps pull you into the drama without distractions. Gameplay is simple, you're making dialogue choices, quick decisions in tense moments, and occasionally completing quick time events. It's straightforward, but it works because the focus is on the narrative. And trust me, the stakes feel real. You'll be second guessing every choice, wondering if you're steering things toward disaster or a slim chance of hope. The game does an amazing job of tackling heavy themes like family, trust, and redemption without feeling preachy or overdone. It's all about the people, their relationships, and the consequences of their actions. And the best part, it's super replayable. You'll want to go back and see how different choices play out and how they affect the lives of everyone involved. If you're into interactive stories like Life is Strange or Detroit Become Human, this one is a must play. As Dusk Falls isn't just a game, it's an emotional ride that sticks with you long after the credits roll. Definitely worth your time if you love a good drama with choices that actually matter.
Family means sacrifice.
Styx Shards of Darkness. Alright, so Styx Shards of Darkness is one of those games that feels like a hidden gem for fans of stealth games. If you're tired of big action-packed blockbusters and just want a game that lets you sneak around, mess with enemies, and pull off satisfying assassinations, this is the one to check out. You play as Styx, a sarcastic little goblin thief with a sharp tongue and an even sharper blade. The game doesn't take itself too seriously, which is honestly refreshing. Styx is constantly cracking jokes and breaking the fourth wall, and it gives the whole experience a bit of personality that sets it apart from other stealth games. The gameplay is all about stealth. You're not a fighter, you're sneaky, fragile, and vulnerable, so running headfirst into combat is a quick way to get yourself killed. The levels are huge with multiple paths to your objectives, and the freedom to approach situations how you want is super satisfying. Climbing, hiding, setting traps, it's classic stealth mechanics done right.
Oops, my bad.
What I love is how creative you can get. Styx has some cool abilities like creating a clone to distract enemies or going invisible for a short time to sneak past guards. It's not just about hiding in the shadows, it's about using everything in your toolkit to outsmart your enemies. The environments are really well designed too. The game throws you into all kinds of cool locations, from towering castles to creepy caves. It's fun just to explore and find all the little hidden secrets tucked away in the levels. If I had to nitpick, the combat, when you're forced into it, can feel a bit clunky and the story isn't exactly groundbreaking. But honestly, you're not here for epic battles or a deep narrative, you're here to be a sneaky goblin, and the game totally delivers on that. Styx Shards of Darkness is perfect for anyone who loves stealth games and wants something a little different. It's clever, challenging, and doesn't overstay its welcome. If you're into games like Thief or Dishonored, this one's definitely worth a shot. Alienation. Alienation is one of those games that's just pure, chaotic fun. It's a top-down, twin-stick shooter from Housemarque, the same devs who brought us gems like Dead Nation and Resogun. If you're into fast-paced, arcade-style action with tons of explosions and alien carnage, this is right up your alley. You pick from 3 different classes: Biospecialist, Tank, and Saboteur, each with their own unique abilities and playstyles. The class system adds a nice layer of strategy, especially when you're playing co-op. And trust me, this game shines in co-op, running through hordes of aliens with friends, pulling off insane combos, and barely surviving a massive firefight. It's a blast. The gameplay is tight and the action is constant. You're mowing down wave after wave of aliens, upgrading your weapons and unlocking skills as you go. The loot system is pretty solid too. It's got that addictive loop of finding better gear to make you even more of a wrecking machine. What I love most is how smooth everything feels. The controls are responsive, the visuals are sharp, and the explosions. Oh man, they're so satisfying. Housemarque knows how to make things feel good, and Alienation is no exception. The environments are surprisingly varied, taking you across different alien-infested locations with a ton of detail. And the difficulty ramps up in a way that keeps you engaged without feeling overwhelming though. Let's be real, it can get pretty intense at times. If there's a downside, it's that the story is pretty much non-existent. But honestly, who cares? You're here for the gameplay, and it absolutely delivers. If you're a fan of games like Helldivers or Diablo but want something with a sci-fi alien twist, Alienation is a must-play. It's one of those games that's easy to pick up and impossible to put down, especially if you've got a couple of friends to jump in with. Knack 2. Knack 2 is a game that honestly doesn't get enough credit. The first Knack had a bit of a rough reception, but the sequel, it's a massive improvement, and dare I say, actually a really fun time if you give it a chance. You play as Knack, this cool little or sometimes massive golem made of relics, and the game is all about smashing enemies, solving puzzles, and growing bigger as you absorb more relics. It's straightforward, but there's something super satisfying about seeing Knack go from pint-sized to towering over everything in sight. The gameplay has way more depth this time around. The combat feels tighter with a bunch of new moves and abilities that make fighting enemies way more fun. You've got punches, kicks, and even some flashy combos that add a bit of flair. Plus, the platforming sections are a nice change of pace with some creative level designs that keep things fresh. What really stands out is how great this game is for co-op. Playing with a friend makes everything more chaotic and fun. You can pull off team moves, work together on puzzles, or just mess around and see how much destruction you can cause. Visually, Knack 2 looks great. It's colorful, polished, and has that cartoonish charm that makes it feel like you're playing a Saturday morning show. The story? Okay. It's nothing groundbreaking, it's a lighthearted tale about saving the world from goblins and robots, but it works for the vibe the game is going for. If you're looking for a game that's easy to pick up, fun to play, and perfect for co-op sessions, Knack 2 is surprisingly solid. It's not trying to be the next big thing, it just wants you to have a good time, and it totally delivers on that. Give it a shot if you're into action platformers or just need something fun to chill with. Loco Motive.
It may just be a flesh wound.
Loco Motive is, well, it's a point-and-click murder mystery set on a train, and honestly, it's such a fun time, especially if you're into whodunits with a good dose of humor. The story kicks off with a murder, obviously, and you're bouncing between 3 characters: a lawyer, a private detective, and hilariously, a guy who ends up a suspect by pure accident. The characters are so quirky and fun to follow that it's hard not to get sucked into the chaos. Gameplay-wise, it's classic point-and-click adventure stuff. You're solving puzzles, picking up random items that somehow work perfectly in weird situations, and chatting up a bunch of eccentric characters. The puzzles aren't too hard, they're just challenging enough to make you think without being frustrating, which is perfect for a game like this.
We just want to know the truth.
The humor, though, that's where this game shines. The dialogue is hilarious, full of clever jokes, silly puns, and that dry British wit. It's got that Monkey Island or Thimbleweed Park vibe, where even the smallest interactions make you smile. You'll genuinely laugh at some of the ridiculous situations the characters get into. The visuals are retro-style pixel art, and they totally nail the vibe. The train setting is detailed and cozy, and all the characters are super expressive, even with the simple animation. It's got this old-school charm that makes the whole experience even better. The game's not long long, you can finish it in a few hours, but honestly, that's part of what makes it work. It's short, sweet, and doesn't drag anything out. By the time the mystery wraps up, you're left feeling like you've just watched a really funny and clever murder mystery movie. If you're into point-and-click games or just want something that's lighthearted, charming, and fun, Loco Motive is absolutely worth checking out. It's a great little game to chill with, and it'll leave you with a big smile by the end.
There is a killer among us, but I assure you they've made a great...
The Ascent. So The Ascent is one of those games that feels like it was made with a ton of love for its genre. It's a top-down, twin-stick shooter set in this gritty cyberpunk world, and let me tell you, the world building here is chef's kiss. It's a game that hooks you with its visuals and atmosphere before you've even fired your first shot. You play as an indent, basically a corporate slave stuck in the middle of a massive power struggle after the mega corporation that owns you suddenly collapses. Yeah, it's as chaotic as it sounds. The story is decent, but honestly, the real star of the show is the world. Every corner of this dystopian city feels alive, from neon-lit slums to sprawling corporate towers, with little details everywhere that make you stop and admire the scenery. Now, the gameplay? It's solid. The twin-stick shooting feels great, with a nice mix of weapons and abilities that let you find your own playstyle. The combat can get intense, especially when you're surrounded by enemies, and the cover mechanics add a bit of strategy to the chaos. It's not mind-blowing, but it's fun, and that's what matters. The RPG elements are a nice touch too. You've got skill trees, loot, and plenty of customization for your character and weapons. It gives you just enough depth without getting overwhelming, which I appreciated. Where this game shines though is in co-op, running through the world with friends, taking down waves of enemies and gearing up together. It's a blast. If you've got a buddy or three, this game goes from good to great real fast. That said, it's not perfect. The mission structure can feel a little repetitive and the UI is clunky at times, but the sheer amount of effort that went into the visuals, atmosphere, and gameplay makes up for most of the rough edges. If you're into cyberpunk settings, twin-stick shooters, or just want a game that's dripping with style, The Ascent is definitely worth your time. It's not reinventing the wheel, but it's a fun, action-packed ride that's even better with friends. The Technomancer. The Technomancer is one of those games that flew under a lot of people's radar, but if you're into sci-fi RPGs, it's worth checking out, especially if you can look past a few rough edges. It's from Spiders, the studio behind Greedfall, and it's got that same scrappy charm, ambitious ideas, a cool setting, and gameplay that's just a little rough around the edges, but still fun. The game takes place on Mars, and it's a mix of cyberpunk vibes and post-apocalyptic sci-fi. You play as a Technomancer, a warrior with these crazy electric powers, trying to navigate a world ruled by corporations, mutants, and shady politics. The setting is honestly the best part. Mars is gritty and full of detail, with different factions and layers of lore that make it feel alive. Combat is decent once you get the hang of it. You've got 3 fighting styles: melee with a staff, a roguelike build with a knife and gun, or a heavy tanky build with a shield, and then you've got your Technomancer abilities on top of that. Those lightning powers, they're flashy and fun, and mixing them into combat adds some much needed variety. That said, combat can feel a little clunky sometimes, especially in tight spaces. The RPG mechanics are solid. You've got skill trees to upgrade your abilities, gear to collect and customize, and decisions that impact the story. It's not the deepest system out there, but it gets the job done and gives you enough freedom to make your character feel unique. Where the game struggles a bit is with its production values. The voice acting is hit or miss, the animations are stiff, and some of the quests feel like filler. But if you can push past that, there's a lot to enjoy here, especially if you're into the whole underdog, B-tier RPG vibe. The story is decent, full of political intrigue, moral choices, and some genuinely interesting characters. It's not groundbreaking, but it's engaging enough to keep you invested. The Technomancer might not be for everyone, but if you like sci-fi worlds, don't mind a bit of jank, and want a game that's trying to do something different, it's definitely worth a shot. It's not perfect, but it's got heart, and that's what makes it memorable. Rise of the Ronin. This is for gamers who love Ghost of Tsushima, so I've been playing Rise of the Ronin, and honestly, it's pretty awesome if you're into action RPGs with a historical twist. It's set in Japan during the late 19th century, when everything's changing. Samurai are on the way out, and Western influence is shaking things up. You play as a Ronin, a masterless samurai, navigating all the political and cultural chaos. Let's start with the combat. It's straight up fun. You've got katanas, spears, and all the classic samurai gear, but then they throw in guns and rifles to mix things up. It's not just about button button mashing. Either there's a flow to it with different stances and combos that make fights feel satisfying. Every hit lands with weight, and pulling off a perfect dodge or counterattack feels amazing. The world is another highlight. It's this big open environment where you can explore towns, rural areas, and industrial zones. The attention to detail is great. You can tell the developers put a lot of effort into making the world feel alive. That said, there are a few places that feel a little empty, but the overall vibe makes up for it. The story, it's solid. It dives into themes like loyalty, honor, and adapting to change, which fit perfectly with the setting. You make choices throughout the game that impact how things play out, so there's a bit of weight to your decisions. Some of the side quests and characters aren't super deep, but the main plot keeps you engaged. Visually, the game looks great most of the time. The lighting, the landscapes, and the way they capture the mix of traditional Japan with Western influences, it's all really well done. There are a few moments where the graphics don't hold up as well, but nothing that breaks the experience. If you liked Ghost of Tsushima or Nioh, you'll probably have a good time with Rise of the Ronin. It's not perfect, there's some room for improvement, but it's got killer combat, a great setting, and enough depth to keep you hooked. Definitely worth checking out if samurai era games are your thing.
As your blades carve a new future.
Children of the Sun. So, Children of the Sun is one of those games that sneaks up on you with how unique it is. You play as the girl, this mysterious masked character out for revenge against a cult called the Children of the Sun. What makes this game stand out is the way it combines puzzle solving with shooting in a really creative way. The core mechanic, you control a single bullet in slow motion. Yeah, it sounds simple, but it's so much more. You're not just firing and forgetting, you're guiding this bullet through enemies, weaving it around corners, and trying to line up the perfect shot to take out multiple targets in one go. It's part puzzle game, part strategy, and it feels incredibly satisfying when you pull off a tricky sequence. As you progress, things get more complex. New enemy types and abilities keep you on your toes, so you're always adjusting your approach. The levels themselves are like little challenges that make you think before you shoot, and that mix of planning and execution is what makes the game so addicting. Visually, it's got this gritty, dark vibe that really suits the whole revenge story. The music and sound effects, spot on. They build tension and give every action this impactful feel. That said, it's a short game. Most people finish it in a few hours. For me, that's not a bad thing, because it doesn't drag or overstay its welcome. The story is pretty minimal though, so if you're looking for a deep narrative, this isn't that kind of game. It's more about the mechanics and the atmosphere. If you're into games that do something different, Children of the Sun is worth checking out. It's challenging, creative, and just the right length to keep you hooked from start to finish. Definitely one to try if you like puzzle shooters with a bit of a dark edge. Killzone Shadowfall. Killzone Shadowfall was one of the big launch titles for the PS4, and even though it's been a while since it came out, it's still a solid FPS if you're in the mood for some sci-fi action. It's set in the Killzone universe but takes a slightly different tone from the previous games, focusing more on espionage and smaller scale conflicts instead of all-out war. The story kicks off 30 years after Killzone 3. The Helghast and Vectans are forced to coexist on the same planet after Helgen gets destroyed, and as you'd expect, things aren't exactly peaceful. You play as Lucas Kellen, a shadow marshal tasked with maintaining order, but the whole thing spirals into political intrigue, betrayals, and a lot of shooting. The story has its moments, but it's a bit all over the place. It tries to be deep and philosophical, but doesn't quite land. The gameplay though, pretty solid. It's got that satisfying Killzone weight to the shooting, and the gunplay feels impactful. One of the coolest additions is the Owl, your personal drum. You can use it to attack enemies, deploy shields, or even zipline to different areas, which adds some variety to how you approach encounters. The level design is more open than the previous games, giving you multiple paths to complete objectives. It's not fully open world, but it does a good job of making you feel like you have options. That said, some missions are a bit too drawn out, and the pacing can feel uneven at times. Visually, Shadowfall was a stunner at launch, and honestly, it still holds up. The lighting, the detailed environments, and the overall art direction make it one of the better looking PS4 titles. The contrast between the sterile Vectan areas and the gritty Helghast zones is especially cool. Overall, Killzone Shadowfall isn't perfect, but it's a good mix of intense shooting, tactical gadgets, and great visuals. If you're a fan of sci-fi shooters, or just want to check out one of the PS4's better launch titles, it's worth a shot. It's not groundbreaking, but it's fun, and sometimes that's all you need. Assassin's Creed Syndicate. Assassin's Creed Syndicate is one of the more underrated entries in the series, and it's honestly a blast if you're in the mood for some old school AC action. Set in Victorian London, the game throws you into the Industrial Revolution, a perfect backdrop for all the chaos and intrigue you'd expect from an Assassin's Creed game. You play as the Fry twins, Jacob and Evie, and the sibling dynamic is one of the highlights of the game. Jacob's more of a brawler who charges in headfirst, while Evie is stealthier and more calculated. Switching between them keeps things fresh, and their banter adds a lot of personality to the story. London itself is gorgeous. The city is massive and packed with detail, from the foggy streets to iconic landmarks like Big Ben and Buckingham Palace. The Industrial Revolution theme gives the game a unique vibe, with trains, carriages, and even grappling hooks adding a bit of flavor to traversal. The grappling hook especially is a game changer, letting you zip up buildings or cross rooftops in seconds. Combat is straightforward but satisfying. It's faster paced than earlier games, focusing on hand-to-hand brawls with brass knuckles, knives, and cane swords. The stealth mechanics are solid too, and sneaking through London's dark alleys or infiltrating factories feels great. The game leans heavily into the gang warfare angle. You're building up your own crew, the Rooks, to take on rival gangs and control the city. It's a fun mechanic that gives you a bit more to do beyond the main story, and it ties into the overall vibe of revolution and rebellion. Speaking of the story, it's pretty decent. It's not as emotionally heavy as something like Assassin's Creed 2 or Origins, but it's fun and keeps you engaged. The historical cameos are a nice touch too. You'll run into figures like Charles Darwin and Alexander Graham Bell, which adds to the period charm. If there's a downside, it's that the formula can feel a bit samey if you've played a lot of the older AC games. The mission structure is still the usual mix of assassinations, tailing, and fetch quests, so it doesn't reinvent the wheel. But overall, Assassin's Creed Syndicate is a great time. It's stylish, fun, and full of that classic AC charm. If you've ever wanted to parkour across Victorian London or lead a gang to overthrow the bad guys, this is your game. Definitely worth checking out if you're a fan of the series or just looking for a good open world adventure. Code Vein. Alright, so Code Vein is basically Dark Souls meets anime, and if that sounds like your kind of thing, you're in for a treat. It's a challenging action RPG with a unique vibe set in this post-apocalyptic world where vampires called revenants fight to survive. It's dramatic, over the top, and surprisingly emotional, which makes it stand out from other games in the genre. You play as a customizable revenant, and one of the best parts is how flexible the character system is. You can completely change your playstyle on the fly by switching blood codes which act as your class. Want to focus on heavy weapons and tank hits? Done. Prefer a fast, nimble build with light attacks? Easy. You can even go full on mage with ranged abilities. It's super versatile and makes experimenting fun. The combat is what you'd expect from a Souls-like methodical, punishing, and rewarding. Timing your dodges, managing stamina, and learning enemy patterns are key. What sets it apart is the companion system. You always have an AI partner with you, and they're actually useful. They can draw aggro, heal you, and deal decent damage, which helps make the game a bit more approachable for newcomers to the genre. The world design is solid, with interconnected areas full of hidden paths, shortcuts, and secrets. It's not as intricate as something like Dark Souls, but it's still fun to explore. The art style leans heavily into anime aesthetics, with flashy visuals, dramatic character designs, and some seriously cool enemy designs. The story is surprisingly engaging. It's all about uncovering your past and figuring out what caused the apocalypse while dealing with themes of loss, sacrifice, and survival. The narrative is told through cutscenes and these dreamlike memory sequences which can feel a bit slow at times, but they add a lot of depth to the world and characters. If there's a downside, it's that some of the environments can feel repetitive and the difficulty isn't always consistent. Some bosses will destroy you in seconds, while others feel like a walk in the park, but honestly, the variety in gameplay and the cool customization options more than make up for it. If you're a fan of Souls-like games and want something with a bit more style and a unique twist, Code Vein is absolutely worth checking out. It's challenging, fun, and has just the right amount of anime flair to make it stand out in the genre. Bound by Flame. Bound by Flame is one of those mid-tier RPGs that's rough around the edges, but still has its moments if you're into fantasy games with a darker tone. It's from Spiders, the same studio behind Greedfall, and you can definitely see their style here, ambitious ideas with a limited budget. You play as Vulcan, a mercenary possessed by a fire demon, which sets up a cool dynamic where you're constantly choosing between giving in to the demon's power for more strength or staying human and sticking to your morals. The choices you make affect how the story plays out, which gives the game some replayability. The combat is probably the game's strongest point. It's action-focused with a mix of melee, ranged attacks, and fire-based magic. You can customize your playstyle by picking between different skill trees, whether you want to focus on being a heavy-hitting warrior, a stealthy rogue, or a fire-wielding mage. The combat feels solid most of the time, but it can also get frustrating, especially when enemies swarm you or bosses hit you like a truck. The story is decent. It's your typical save the world from an ancient evil kind of setup, but the fire demon angle adds some flavor. The characters you meet along the way are hit or miss. Some of them are interesting, while others are forgettable or have awkward dialogue. Visually, the game looks dated now, but it still has some cool designs, especially when it comes to the enemies and environments. The world has a gritty, dark fantasy vibe, which works well for the tone they're going for. If you're looking for a deep, polished RPG, this probably isn't it. But if you're in the mood for something a little janky but still fun, Bound by Flame has enough charm and interesting ideas to keep you entertained. It's not groundbreaking, but it's worth checking out if you're into dark fantasy action RPGs and don't mind a bit of jank. Blacktail. So, Blacktail is one of those games that feels like it came out of nowhere but leaves a lasting impression. It's a first-person adventure that dives into Slavic folklore, and instead of a cheerful fairy tale, it goes for a darker, more mysterious tone. You play as Yaga, a girl accused of witchcraft and cast out of her village, trying to uncover what's real and what's myth in her past. What's cool about Blacktail is how it really leans into player choice. Your actions shape Yaga's morality. You can be a protector of the forest or give in to the witchy, darker side. It's not just about picking dialogue options either. Even the small things, like whether you hunt animals or spare them, can tilt your morality, and the world reacts to those decisions in subtle, meaningful ways. The gameplay is a nice mix of exploration, combat, and crafting. You've got a bow as your main weapon, and combat feels solid, especially when you start using magical abilities alongside your arrows. The creatures you face are straight out of folklore, strange, creepy, and definitely memorable. Resource management plays a big role, so you're always deciding whether to save or use materials for upgrades, arrows, or potions. The crafting is straightforward but fits naturally into the flow of the game. The world itself is gorgeous and weird in the best way. It's a dense, vibrant forest that feels alive, with glowing mushrooms, haunting landmarks, and odd little details everywhere. The art style is almost dreamlike, but there's always an edge of creepiness that keeps you on your toes. It's the kind of place that begs you to explore, just to see what strange thing you'll stumble upon next. The story is told in a way that keeps you curious. You've got narrated moments that feel like someone telling an old fairy tale, but there's also a lot of piecing things together yourself. The characters you meet are quirky and odd, adding to the feeling that you're wandering through a twisted storybook. But as always, it's not without its flaws. The combat, while enjoyable, can get a little samey after a while, and the crafting system could use a bit more depth. But honestly, the overall experience is so unique and captivating that it's easy to overlook those minor issues. If you're into folklore-inspired stories, games with a strong moral element, or just want something that feels fresh and different, Blacktail is worth checking out. It's a strange, beautiful journey that sticks with you long after you've put the controller down.
You killed again.
Hellpoint. Hellpoint is what happens when you take a Souls-like formula and throw it into a dark, creepy sci-fi setting. If you're into challenging combat, cryptic storytelling, and atmospheric exploration, this one's worth a look. It's not perfect, but it's got enough interesting ideas to keep you hooked if you're a fan of the genre. The game is set on Irid Novo, a derelict space station orbiting a black hole. The setting is easily one of the highlights. Think Dead Space meets Dark Souls, with a heavy dose of unsettling sci-fi horror. The station is sprawling, interconnected, and full of secrets. Every new area feels like a reward, with its eerie architecture, strange enemies, and hidden paths. It's a game that rewards exploration, and there's a lot to uncover. Combat is very Souls-inspired. You've got light and heavy attacks, dodges, and stamina management, and every encounter feels like a test of patience and timing. What sets Hellpoint apart is its focus on experimentation. You can mix and match weapons, gear, and upgrades to find a setup that works for you, and the game encourages you to adapt as you face tougher enemies and bosses. The the black hole mechanic is a nice touch. The station's orbit affects the world in real time, changing enemy placements and triggering special events depending on where the black hole is in its cycle. It adds an extra layer of depth to the exploration and keeps you on your toes. Now, the game has some rough edges. The combat, while solid, can feel a bit clunky compared to Souls or Elden Ring. Enemy animations aren't always the smoothest, and some hitboxes can feel a little off. The story is deliberately vague, which is fine for the genre, but it might leave some players feeling more confused than intrigued. Visually, the game does a great job with its atmosphere. The lighting, shadows, and overall design of Irid Novo are creepy and cool, even if some textures and animations feel a little dated. The sound design adds to the tension, with eerie ambient noises and unsettling music that make the station feel alive or haunted. Banisher's Ghost of New Eden. This one is something special. Set in 1695, it follows a ghost hunting duo, Auntie Duarte and Red Mac Wraith, who dedicate their lives to protecting the living from restless spirits. But there's a twist. After a mission goes horribly wrong, Auntie becomes one of the very ghosts they've sworn to banish. What follows is a journey through the haunted wilderness of North America as Red tries to find a way to save her from her fate. The game hits you hard with its story. It's not just about fighting ghosts, it's about love, loss, and tough choices. You're constantly faced with moral dilemmas, like whether to banish spirits or find a more peaceful resolution, and your decisions actually impact how the story unfolds. It's one of those games where you'll sit there for a minute staring at the screen, trying to figure out what to do because everything feels like it matters. Gameplay-wise, you play as both Red and Auntie. Red handles the physical combat, while Auntie uses her ghostly powers to deal with supernatural threats and solve puzzles. Switching between them keeps things interesting, and their abilities complement each other well. The combat isn't perfect, it can feel a bit repetitive or clunky at times, but it's serviceable and doesn't take away from the overall experience. Visually, this game is stunning. The 17th century American frontier has never looked so eerie and beautiful. The environments are packed with detail, from misty forests to spooky abandoned settlements. The sound design is also on point, with atmospheric audio that pulls you into the game's haunting world. If there's a standout feature, it's the relationship between Red and Auntie. Their connection feels real, and the emotional weight of their situation adds depth to every moment. You're not just going through the motions, you care about these characters and what happens to them. That said, it's not perfect. Some of the combat mechanics could use more polish, and a few parts of the gameplay might feel repetitive if you're looking for constant variety. But if you're here for the story and the atmosphere, it more than makes up for any shortcomings. If you're into narrative-driven games with a strong emotional core and a hauntingly beautiful setting, Banisher's Ghost of New Eden is absolutely worth your time. It's one of those games that sticks with you long after you've finished playing. Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown. So Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown is a fresh take on the series that goes back to its roots with a 2.5D Metroidvania approach, and honestly it's a really solid game. It puts you in the boots of Sargon, a young warrior from an elite group called the Immortals, as he sets out to rescue Prince Ghassan in the mythical world of Mount Kiath. The game leans heavily into Persian mythology, which gives it a unique vibe compared to other titles in the franchise. The gameplay is where it really shines. The platforming is smooth and fluid, capturing that classic Prince of Persia feel. Lots of wall running, precise jumps, and tight timing. It's satisfying, especially when you pull off a tricky sequence. The Metroidvania style exploration adds a layer of depth, with areas opening up as you gain new abilities. It feels rewarding to backtrack and discover secrets you couldn't reach before. Combat is fast, responsive, and surprisingly deep. You've got a mix of melee attacks, special moves, and time manipulation powers that keep things interesting. It's not overly complex, but there's enough variety to make every encounter feel engaging. But some of the boss fights are challenging in the best way, pushing you to really master the mechanics. Visually, the game is gorgeous. The art style is vibrant and colorful, which helps Mount Chaos stand out as this mythical, otherworldly place. Each area is distinct, from lush forests to eerie ruins, and the level of detail makes the world feel alive. The music is another standout. It's atmospheric and fits the tone perfectly, enhancing the overall experience. The story is decent, it's not groundbreaking, but it does enough to keep you invested in Sargon's journey and the mysteries of Mount Kiaf. The focus here is more on gameplay and exploration, so the narrative takes a bit of a backseat, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. If there's a downside, it's that the game hasn't gotten the attention it deserves. Ubisoft really didn't market it as well as they could have, which is a shame, because it's a genuinely great game for fans of the genre. Some people might also feel the story could have been more fleshed out, but the gameplay more than makes up for it. If you're a fan of action platformers, Metroidvania games, or just loved the old school Prince of Persia titles, The Lost Crown is definitely worth playing. It's fun, polished, and has its own unique flavor that makes it stand out. I don't sleep on this one, it's a real gem.
I will fulfill my destiny and save the kingdom.
9 Souls. Okay, so 9 Souls is one of those games that feels special from the moment you start playing. It's a 2D action platformer from Red Candle Games, the studio behind Detention and Devotion, and it's got this really cool mix of mythology and sci-fi. They call it top punk, and honestly, it's a vibe. You play as Yai, this badass warrior on a mission to take down the 9 Souls, these ancient rulers of a world called New Kunlun. The story is mysterious and layered, and it's the kind that leaves you thinking even after you put the controller down. It's got that Red Candle signature style dark, a little creepy, but super captivating. The combat is where it really shines. If you've played Sekiro or anything like it, you'll feel right at home. It's all about timing and precision. You can deflect attacks to build up energy for these devastating counters, and it feels amazing when you get it right. Plus, you've got a bow for ranged attacks and some cool movement abilities like wall jumping and grappling, which keeps the gameplay fresh. The world itself is gorgeous, it's all hand-drawn, and every area has this mix of ancient and futuristic vibes. One minute you're exploring crumbling temples, and the next you're in these glowing neon-lit ruins. The art style is stunning, and it's the kind of game where you'll just stop and admire the scenery. The music deserves a mention too. It's atmospheric and fits perfectly with the world. It's not overpowering, but adds just the right amount of tension or calm, depending on what's happening. Now, fair warning, the game is tough. The combat takes a bit to get the hang of, and some bosses will test your patience, but if you stick with it, it's super rewarding. The difficulty never feels unfair. It's more about learning and adapting. If you're into challenging games with tight combat, beautiful visuals, and a story that actually makes you think, 9 Souls is definitely worth checking out. It's unique, it's stylish, and it's one of those games that just hits differently. I don't sleep on this one.